Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about baby DeOrr. He completely went missing in the open woods and it's just a really strange story. A friend actually texted me the other day and was like, you have to watch this episode on this 2-year-old who went missing. And when I watched it, it really hit home because it just goes to show that your child can go missing in an instant, and that's terrifying. So if you guys like these type of videos, don't forget to subscribe, like, and let's get to it. So this story starts out with the parents, Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Kunz. They were actually high school sweethearts for about 2.5 years. They broke up after graduation and they went their separate ways, and they both ended up getting married. That led to divorce. And Jessica ended up having 2 other children. A few years later, they end up running into each other and kind of just pick up back where they left off. Months later, they end up getting engaged and she ends up becoming pregnant with baby DeOrr Kunz Jr. They say that they were both really excited and looking forward to having this baby together, and their families were really happy and excited for them, and it was a really special and exciting time for everyone. They called him Little Man and he was obsessed with trucks. They say he was the easiest baby. He was always happy. He was singing. He would play by himself. They just say he was so easy and just didn't give them a hard time. So she ends up going on to be a nurse's assistant, and her grandfather, Robert, he goes by Bob, he had a lot of health issues. He was older, he was on oxygen, and she took care of him. She was his primary nurse, and every day she would go to his house, and he says that every day she would go, she would bring baby DeOrr with him. Jessica grew up going camping and fishing with her grandfather. They would do it all the time, and she knew that, you know, his time is numbered. She doesn't expect for him to live much longer, so she wanted to camp and do outside things like she used to with him as much as she could. And then on July 10th, 2015, they decide to go camping for the weekend. It was kind of a last minute idea. They end up visiting the Timber Creek campground in Idaho with Jessica and Vernal, and then the grandfather Bob, and then his friend Isaac, who was a friend of Bob's, the grandfather. At night that they get to the campsite, they set up camp, they set up their tents, everything's totally normal, and then the next morning they wake up, everything's fine and normal, and what happens is Jessica and Vernal walk about 100 yards to this little lake area where they decide to start fishing. And meanwhile, baby DeOrr is sitting on the ground, kind of a little bit behind his grandpa, off to the side, like maybe right about here if I'm his grandfather. And his grandfather's sitting there. He has his oxygen and his oxygen mask, and he says that he could see him, and he says that he could see him because he was right there. And as the parents walked off, this is where it gets a little bit messy and a little bit of miscommunication happens. The grandfather said that they were walking off and they're like, you got him, okay, bye. But he says he couldn't really hear them and he wasn't really sure what they were saying. He says it wasn't an actual, hey, will you watch him? They were kind of just like running off pretty quickly, and they just didn't really have that conversation of, hey, we're gonna be going a little bit, can you watch him? That's where it gets a little bit cloudy. But Jessica and Vernal say that they were walking off and said that, hey, can you watch him? And he said, yeah, sure, no problem. So that's where it gets a little bit shady. And as I go through this story, there's going to be even more miscommunication, change of stories, and it gets really weird beyond this point. Vernal and Jessica are fishing. Vernal comes back, I guess, to the camp. I don't know what he was doing to come back, but he said, hey, Bob, where's baby DeOrr? And he says, right there, just saw him a minute ago. And that's where he starts yelling for him. DeOrr, DeOrr, where are you? I don't see you, blah, 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 blah. And he says there's just no trace of him. And this is where he starts yelling, where are you? And he starts getting frightened. And Jessica hears what he's saying, and as soon as she hears, she drops the fishing pole in a panic and runs up to see what's going on. She says in the panic she was yelling for him, screaming for him. She checked the whole campsite, she checked the vehicles and the cars, she checked the roads nearby. But this is a little bit weird too. If you look at where the campsite is, it's very secluded, it's rugged, it's from the aerial view map, there's not a road nearby, so I don't really know what she's talking about. She says in one of her interviews that she checked all these places within a few minutes, and then she started to call her mom frantically over and over again, but there was bad service, and then the mom tried to call back, so they kind of played phone tag for a minute or two until the mom finally got a hold of her. And then this is where Jessica said, he's missing, I can't find him, blah blah blah, and her mom says, you need to call the police ASAP. So she calls 911, and when she calls 911, she tells them that he's been missing for about an hour. And I do get that in a tragic, scary, terrifying circumstance, that time can be moving and you have no idea how much time has gone by. So I don't know if it was an hour, I don't know if it was 15 minutes. So she's on the phone with 911, and of course, because it's such a secluded area, it takes a little bit for the emergency services to reach where they're at. So by this time, he had been missing for a few hours, and you know, the first 24 hours are the most crucial, important if you're going to end up finding them. As searchers are there, a dog ends up picking up a scent over at the reservoir where I guess where the water is, and this is where they start to get nervous. Did he maybe fall and bump his head and possibly drown? You know, it's really scary not knowing where a 2-year-old is, especially when there's water involved. So the divers search, they search everywhere around this reservoir, nothing. And they even said that his boots were big on him, so if he was running around, his boots could have easily fell off, because they were really worried that did an animal get him, because he's only 30 pounds, he's a really tiny little boy. But if that would have happened, they would have found a shoe, a piece of clothing, blood, something. They didn't find anything, no trace of blood, none of his clothes, DNA, nothing. It's literally as if he vanished into thin air. And he even had his precious monkey and blankie at camp. And if you ever had a 2-year-old, I have a 4-year-old right now. She will not sleep without her eye mask and her blankie. It is a known fact, it ain't happening. So if he wandered off, most likely if he went and just wandered somewhere, he would have had one of those two things with him, or even some sort of toy, but nothing was missing. So 2 months go by, and they have a private investigator, and he starts asking around camp who was there that day. There's actually another mother who was there that same day, and she had 2 little boys, and she had noticed that this guy was giving her children, 2 little boys, these really odd looks, and he seemed creepy, and she didn't feel good about it, and she quickly left. And what's strange is the private investigator mentioned that Jessica had said previously, before they had found out about this other woman, that she had went to this rest stop right before you get into camp because she had to get some tampons, and she noticed the same guy who looked scruffy and weird, and he was really staring hard at DeOrr, and she said that he drove a black Jeep Rubicon. Well, when the private investigator put 2 and 2 together that it was the same guy as the lady, they actually tracked this Jeep Rubicon guy down, and they interrogated him, and he had an airtight alibi for where he was that day, so he had nothing to do with it. This is where they start to become suspicious of the friend Isaac that's friends with the grandfather Bob. And the reason they become suspicious of him is because, one, the parents, Jessica and Vernal, had just met him the day of that camping trip, and 2, he has a criminal history of violence. Now, investigators say that Isaac always was cooperative with them, always told his story, and he never changed his story. He always said the same thing, that he was fishing, there was somebody around him, but it was a different part of where Jessica and Vernal were, and he actually came back to the site, and Bob was pacing and looked frantic and nervous, and he said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And this is where Bob tells him that his great-grandson's missing, and he says, "Oh no," and starts to help look. Then they shift the focus to Grandpa Bob, and they ask him, and he tells the same story, that he was sitting there and the baby was sitting there playing, and he would look back from time to time, and the last time he looked back, he wasn't there. And like I said, Bob wasn't in good shape. He needed people to help them. to help him. There's no way within such a short amount of time he could have done something to him and hid it and cleaned up after it. He could barely, you know, walk and get around on his own. He had a lot of trouble breathing. It just was impossible for him to be able to do anything. So this is where the investigators start to notice a lot of inconsistencies that are small inconsistencies, but then they lead to bigger ones. Starting with Jessica, the mom. She says that Isaac came over and was banging on the door around 8:30 in the morning, and it annoyed her. Whereas when they talked to Isaac and he had the same story over and over and over again, he said that they were already up between 8 and 8:30 and he never banged on their door. Jess says that she cooked breakfast that morning, whereas Vernal says he cooked the breakfast that morning. And this is where they're like, something's not adding up. Jess says that it was her idea to call 911 and that she said, we need to call 911 like right now. And Bob said, okay. And then of course, Vernal, when he was telling his story when she wasn't around, he claims that it was his idea to call 911. And when he said, we got to do it right now, Bob said, no, we don't. It's not a big deal. And when they talked to Bob, the grandfather, he said neither of them had brought up or mentioned that they should call 911. So who's lying? And why are you lying over such small facts? That tells me somebody's hiding something. The investigators asked them to give them a timeline. And she says about 10 o'clock she realized she needed some tampons. So they went to go drive into town and they got lost for about an hour looking for diesel. And they finally found this little store that had diesel. And she says that the gas attendant clerk guy was filling up their gas tank and talking to DeOrr. I'm like, oh, honey, you're so cute, whatever. And then they ran out of diesel, so they ended up leaving. So the investigators talked to the clerk and he said, yeah, I remember them. We definitely didn't run out of diesel and they didn't have a baby in the car with them. But Jessica says that she ran back into the store when they ended up coming back, and Vernal had little DeOrr outside and they ran into the beer stock guy who stocks it all up. And the beer stock guy ended up talking to the baby and was like, you're so cute. And because he loved trucks, he said the beer truck guy ended up putting DeOrr on the truck and like let him sit on it, and he was so excited. But when investigators went to talk to the beer truck guy, he said, yeah, I remember seeing them, but I didn't talk to them, and I'm definitely not allowed to put them on my truck. And it didn't add up because when Vernal told the story, he said it was out front of the store. But when they talked to the beer truck guy, he said that doesn't even make sense because I park my truck in the back of this.
My camera decided to not film the last segment, but basically what happened is the investigators talked them into doing a lie detector test, which they both failed, and still to this day they have found no evidence or anything. But I wish I could give you guys some updates. So nothing has came up from this case still to this day, and they ended up getting divorced, but that's about it. I love you guys so much. I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you soon.